Anyway, welcome everyone. Thanks very much for signing up through the Museum of Walking. We'd much rather be outside and leading you around in a group. But what's incredible is that by doing it online, we're able to include people who come as far away from as Helsinki, Tallinn, Toronto, all sorts of different places who are on this call as we started off. So Paul, I think, has said it all. There's an opportunity to buy the map that's just been published with a discount. So Paul will tell you something about that. And this is all a big experiment for us. This is only about the third or fourth time we've done a Zoom meeting. So bear with us and hopefully you'll have a really enjoyable hour. So off you go, Paul.
Okay, thank you. So I think if there's anybody else that you know who isn't on the call who who was planning on being on the call, they'll need to join very soon. Otherwise, we're going to, we are going to close it, which is a sort of security measure to lock you all in
fact, Paul, I need you to do that now. So because I've just made you host. So if you can lock, because we're at 1807.
Yeah. Okay, so we're locked in. You can leave, obviously, but I'm afraid it's going to be difficult to get back in. I'm just going to mute one or two people who aren't on mute, just to save the background noise there. So I'm going to share my screen with you to give you a view of where we're going. So I'm hoping this will all be appearing on your screen now. Hopefully you've worked out there is a gallery view and another view which is called, I can't remember what the other view is called now, but if you go to the one that isn't the gallery view, you should be able to see the main screen, which is this image of the map. So this is a Google map, and this maps out the 15 trees I'm going to be talking about today. So the first one is up in Barnet, and it's called the Monk and Hadley Oak, and that is a tree which I'm going to take you to right now. So this is the very edge of London. Just beyond this tree, London ends, and it becomes Hertfordshire. This tree is on the A1000, which is the main road between London and St Albans, and would have been a very important road at one time. This is an oak tree that's on the edge of the A1000, and I think it marks a parish boundary. I think it's a boundary tree in that sense. It's a really large tree when you get to see it closely. I'm not sure Google Street View is going to quite do it justice. I also have an image of it which I shall try and bring up for you as well, which is going to be one which I shall also share with you. Just going to stop that and move to a different screen. So just coming up on your screen now should be an image of this tree which I took a couple of summers ago in its full glory. It's a really magnificent tree. It must be about 200 years old. This whole area before it was developed was called the Southall, which was an area of woodland, and was cleared maybe in medieval times, but no doubt some trees remained. Obviously this is not that old, but it's reminiscent of a much more wooded landscape that would have been around that area. So it's common to find these large old trees in outer London boroughs. And I'm going to show you some more of these as well. But this one, I think, is quite a local landmark, and one which I certainly noticed when I went walking up there. It features in my book, London is a Forest, if anyone's read that. Don't expect you to have, but you never know. So the next one I'm going to take you to, well, I'm going to just take you back to the map and talk about the other one that we're going to. Now, let me get you back to the map. Okay, so coming up is the map again, and the next one is we're going out to Upminster, right on the edge of London, at the end of the district line. I should mention as well, the tree at Monk and Hadley is Barnet, and it's a short walk from High Barnet tube station, so you could argue that's at the end of the Northern Line. So I was sort of semi-thinking of end of transport lines. So this next one's at Upminster, right on the edge of London and Essex. And this one is the oldest street tree in London, I think. There are maybe some more which are older, which I'm not aware of, but this one is pretty special. This one's called the Little Gaines Lane Oak. So it's on Little Gaines Lane, which is out in Upminster. I'll take you around it on Google Street View. You should be able to see that on your screen now. It's thought to be 350 years old. It's on this rather nice suburban leafy avenue, which is otherwise planted with fairly regular street trees, including some cherries and a lime avenue there, a lovely common lime avenue. And there is the Little Gaines Lane Oak. And you can just get a sense of how big and splendid that is. It's also very interesting to see how it's been not incorporated into the gardens, and it's left as a marker tree. No doubt this is a former boundary tree as well. Like the tree at Monk and Hadley, the oak tree there, these are both English oaks, Quercus robur, or the peduncular oak. And I'm going to put up a picture of a pedunculate oak leaf, so we can just have a look at that. So coming up next is a picture of a pedunculate oak leaf. This is obviously in autumn. It's neither of these trees. I can't remember which tree it was, although it says SE24. So I wonder whether it might be the Brockwell Park oak, which doesn't feature on this tour, but it's a fine 500-year-old oak. So the thing about oaks in the UK, there are two native oaks. There's the English or pedunculate oak, and then there's the sessile oak. They're very similar trees. They're both found in London. The English oak is probably more common, the pedunculate oak. And the way you can tell the difference is how the leaves and the acorns grow. And you can see with this English oak that the leaves have very little stalk where the leaf attaches to the twig. And it has, conversely, acorns, unfortunately not in this image, which are on very long stalks. So it has stalkless leaves and stalked acorns, whereas a sessile oak is the other way around, with stalked leaves and stalkless acorns. That's the way to tell. And sessile oaks tend to be associated with more sort of poorer, more acid soils. And you tend to get those in more northerly parts of the country and in places where the soil is particularly poor. For instance, actually in the south of England, the Blean forest near Canterbury is a lot of sessile oak there, but otherwise English oak will be the one that you normally see. A good example of a sessile oak in London, though, is the Bruce Castle oak at Tottenham. If anybody knows that oak, which is a fantastic, another nearly possibly 500-year-old oak, which is a sessile oak. So going back to Little Gaines Lane oak, the 350-year-old tree that we have in Upminster, you can see that this has been pollarded, meaning that the branches have been cut off. Similarly, the Monk and Hadley oak, I think, has been pollarded. I had previously thought that was what they call a maiden, and a maiden oak is a tree which has never been pollarded. But looking at that tree with the branches not covered in leaves, you can see signs that it has been pollarded. And certainly with the Little Gaines Lane oak, you can see how that's been pollarded over the years. And this is probably goes back to before it was actually on the street here. So no doubt it's being pollarded because of health and safety fears, but it probably was a pollard oak in a field or on a field boundary that has somehow been left here. And I think we have to thank the developers of this part of Upminster, which looks like it was possibly in the 1920s or 30s, who decided to keep that oak. So it must have been a significant oak back then. So I'm going to take you back to the map, and we'll go to the next tree in a minute. So just going to go back here, and the next one is down in Croydon. So I'm going to get that lined up for us. So Croydon, of course, is the very edge of the Great North Wood, which would be where the forest that once covered a lot of southeast London, and it would be it went from, I think it was Norwood to Selhurst, actually, around North Croydon all the way to New Cross and Deptford, and that woodland was still there in the 17th century, and in fact into the 19th century, and there are still remnants of that in places like Sydenham Hill Woods. This tree, which we're going to have a look at now, is on Oaks Road, the aptly named Oaks Road, which is in Croydon, and it's at the bottom of the Addington Hills Park. So I'm just going to get the picture up for this one. So coming up on your screen now is the Oaks Road oak, which is another pollarded oak, and there's a whole row of them along this street of rather swanky houses in Croydon. On the other side of the road from the houses is, as I said, the Addington Hills Park, which has got also is full of managed woodland or ancient woodland with some very old coppiced and pollarded trees in there. So it's thought that maybe these trees could have been part of that woodland. They probably weren't part of the Great North Wood, which started a bit further north, but they certainly predate these houses, which are 20th century. So another example of a fine pollarded oak around the edge of London. So the next one that I'm going to take you to is actually going to be in West London. So we're going out to, let me get my screen back up for you to share that one with you. So we're going back to West London. Well, it's our first visit to West London. And we're going to Osterley to see what is a golden rain tree. So a golden rain tree, Colreuter paniculata, for those who like a Latin name, like myself, will be very interested in this tree, which is quite an exotic tree compared to the old native oak trees that we've been looking at so far. So this is a tree which we'll just have a look at now. So I'm just going to move that round to this screen. So here we are outside Osterley Station on the Piccadilly line going out towards Heathrow. Osterley Station was, I think it was built in the 1930s. It's very Art Deco and is very much like those trees that you can, the stations rather, the architecture that's typical of the Piccadilly line, particularly in the more northern parts of it when you think of somewhere like Arnos Grove. But Osterley is another fine Art Deco modernist station, and it has this rather splendid golden rain tree outside it, shading the bus stop here. Now, golden rain trees are so called because in the high summer, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to see, as we look at the history of this tree, it during different seasons. So this is the tree in winter, not much to see, although sometimes these trees can hang on to their seed pods, right through the winter, which result from the flowers. So this is a street view from July 2015. And this shows you the end of the flowering period, which occurs in about July, beginning of July, and gives the name the golden rain tree. So in the canopy of the tree, it has this dust of golden blossom, which can be really quite striking. I've got some more images which I'm going to share with you, so we can have a look at those. And I can tell you a bit more about this tree. So golden rain trees originate from East Asia. They have another common name, which is pride of India, but they don't actually come from India. They're more further China and Korea, I believe. So I'm just going to share some of these images with you. So this is coming up on your screen now, the tree in July. I think it was last year, actually. I went down there in July to have a look at it, and it was in full flower. It looked absolutely incredible. But the thing about these trees is that they can they have interest all through the seasons. So I'm going to show you some other images. Coming up now is the new leaves which emerge in the spring, and they have this beautiful pink coral leaf shape, leaf color, which can look really striking when you see the whole tree covered in those. And I believe that if we're lucky, I might be able to see a view of that phase of the tree in it's on the, if I can find the right. The trouble with these street views is it's difficult to find the right time and the right in the street view history. But I did see when I was looking at this earlier, street view, when you can see that it's, I think this might be it. So I'm just going to move back to the tree on the map. So just bear with me. So coming up on your screen now is this golden rain tree in April 2016, and you can see those leaves, and it has this fleeting moment where the leaves are this beautiful coral pink color, followed by, in high summer, those golden flowers. Later in the season as well, going to take you back to the my images. I have an image of that tree, so bear with me. So coming up on your screen now, the seed pods. So after the flowers have disappeared, they develop into these seed pods, which can continue on the tree or the right way through the winter, and they can look quite striking as well. So I always think of the golden rain tree as a tree for all seasons, in that it has this spring interest, this high summer interest, and it flowers when very few other trees are flowering. And then later in the season, it has these seed pods as well. So it's a really great urban tree, and one that I would certainly like to see more of planted. The one outside Osterley station is a particularly large and old one. I don't know of any larger than that. You do occasionally see some large ones around town, outside Stoke Newington Town Hall, actually, if anybody knows that. There's a bunch of them, which are probably about the same date. I've seen images of Osterley station from just after it was built, and there's no sign of this tree then. So this tree is relatively young, so it's less than 100 years old. It's quite mature. It was obviously planted, but I think it was probably planted soon after the the station was built. I can show you another interesting thing about these trees as well. So I'm going to take you back to the street view. They have become quite good at seeding themselves in London, and all around this area, you can see this next to the post box there on the street view is some golden rain tree seedlings, which have obviously seeded themselves from that tree. And occasionally you see them on railway embankments and so on. If ever you travel through South Kensington Station, there's some dotted along the railway embankment near there. So it's grows, it seems to like our climate particularly. Right, so better take you back to the map. And then a little intro into the next tree, which is going to be the Wembley elm. So just bear with me while I get that one up on my screen for you. So the Wembley elm, if anybody has been to Wembley recently, or in the last however many years, there's a bar there, which football fans no doubt inhabit quite a lot if they're at Wembley. And this is a tree for football fans, perhaps. So I'm just going to bring this one up and we'll have a look at it. What's interesting about this elm tree is that it's obviously it's survived Dutch elm disease. It's an old elm tree. It is an unusual species in that it's an European white elm, Ulmus leavis, L-A-E-V-I-S. There's not very many of those around. There's one other one which I know of, which is the Ladywell Fields elm tree, if anybody knows that, in southeast London, which is mislabeled in the park. I can't remember what they call it in the park, but it's actually a European white elm, the same species as this tree, which is outside the Arch Bar with Wembley in the background there. And let's have a look at this at different times of the year as well. So going back to June 2012 here, and you can see this in leaf there. You can also see that the Arch Bar was formerly known as the Greyhound, but you can also see the Wembley Arch there. So I wonder, clearly the Arch Bar came after the Wembley Arch was built. You can see this tree maybe isn't in the rudest of health. I know that Brent Council, who look after this, have been doing some management of it. But you can see here in 2012, the branches in the canopy are looking a bit sick, some of those. And if we go down the street and have a look at this tree from another viewpoint, we can have a look at some other angles of it, and you can see some more dead branches in there. So I'm a little bit worried about this tree, but it has been like this for some time. It doesn't seem to be been getting worse. However, if we go back to 2008, you can see the some of the branches there are dying off, but it's not quite such in poor state there. So in the last 11 years, of which Google Street View gives us a view of it, it has not changed dramatically. And that's something which we'll notice with old trees, is they don't change dramatically. Trees tend to grow faster when they're young, and as they age, they continue to be the same. But what we can see about this is that it's maybe got a bit sicker in some of its top higher branches. But hopefully it's a tree that will survive for a long time. European white elms are very unusual, so it's great to have some more of those. Right, so the next tree that I'm going to take you to is going to be in Walthamstow. So we're going to go and have a look at the Wood Street horse chestnut, if anybody knows that one. Let me get this one ready for you, and then we'll come and have a look at that in a minute. Wood Street is in the east of Walthamstow, and horse chestnuts, of course, are trees which are just in flower now. So no doubt people may have noticed these on their daily walks and so on. Just having a little bit of difficulty getting the street view to, here we are. So I'm going to swap us over to this other screen. So coming up on the screen now is a view of Wood Street in Walthamstow and the Wood Street horse chestnut, which is an official Great Tree of London. I should say something about the trees on this tour. Some of them are official great trees. Some of them appear on the new Great Trees of London map, which has a new selection of trees as well. And some of them are entirely not from either of those things, are ones which have come from trees which people have pointed out to me or suggested, or ones which I think actually lend themselves to the medium of Zoom a bit better than some of the trees in parks and so on. So this one actually is an official great tree and is on my map. It's a really fine example of a horse chestnut, and it stands above this clapboard health food shop, which was apparently a butcher before it became a health food shop. So it just shows you how Walthamstow has changed and how gentrification perhaps has taken place in East 17. So what's interesting about this tree is it's probably been there for 200 years, perhaps, quite elderly for a horse chestnut. And we can go back and have a look at it. We can probably find it in flower in one of the views. I think I did earlier. So let's see, here we have it from April 2016, and you can see the flower candles on that horse chestnut just appearing now for you. We've probably got some other views. I think you can't talk about horse chestnuts without mentioning the leaf issues which they have. So just coming up on your screen now is August 2017, and you can see the leaves are dying. And this happens to virtually every horse chestnut tree in London. It's caused by a moth, the larvae of a leaf mining moth. So it's a caterpillar, a tiny caterpillar, which eats the leaves from the inside out. It arrived in the UK in early this century. It's now affecting most horse chestnuts. It makes them very unsightly and no doubt weakens them in the long run. But they do survive, and they come into flower and leaf every spring. And I think it's particular joy to see horse chestnuts coming back into flower when they look so sick in high summer during the at that time of year. What's interesting about Streetview as well is we can go back to July 2008, and we can see that in July 2008, when this tree was photographed, I've lost 2008 now, but this is, yeah, here we are, 2008. There is very little sign of leaf miner attack. So it shows the rapidity with which that pest has got into our population of horse chestnuts, which is a terribly sad thing. But as I say, it doesn't kill them. It just makes them look unsightly in high summer. But 2008, everything was fine with horse chestnuts. Something which is quite interesting, someone was telling me that great tits are now feeding on the larvae of this leaf mining moth. So it shows how nature can adapt. So whether so great tits are beginning to realize that the larvae, these little caterpillars, are good food. So they're beginning to eat them off the trees. Hopefully that means that there may in the future be some sort of balance struck between this new insect, which was only known to science since the 1980s, and it was found in the native populations of horse chestnuts, which are in Albania and northern Greece. Horse chestnuts, of course, has been a tree that's been in the UK for hundreds of years. I think it was introduced by John Tredescant the Younger, actually, which makes it a 17th century introduction. But we regard it with great fondness as a tree which is very familiar to us, and I think we regard it as a part of our landscape now. And no doubt that's true of other trees. And there's one other tree which I'm going to show you. I think it's might not be the next one, but I'm going to take you back to the map, and we've been to Upminster, we've been to Croydon, we've been to Osterley, we've been to Wembley, we've been to Walthamstow, and the next one is another oak tree, and this is in Sydenham. So let me get this one ready to go. And this is on Lorry Park Avenue. So if anybody saw the post that I put up on Instagram and on Twitter today, and on Facebook as well, that showed this tree. And this is a really quite remarkable tree, I think. So I'm just going to go back and look down the street, actually. So let me move on to street view of this one. Now, so Lorry Park Avenue is in Sydenham in southeast London and was very much within the Great North Wood. We're looking down Lorry Park Avenue towards Sydenham Church here. And if anybody's familiar with the paintings of Pissarro, who famously lived in London in Norwood in the 19th century, he painted this view. I'm afraid I haven't got that image to show you, but he also painted a view, quite a few views of Norwood and so on. It looks like a rural village, but the church features in them, and there's a bunch of trees down there, which I don't think are still there, sadly. But no doubt the tree that he had his back to was. So I'm just going to turn us round, and on this roundabout in the front of us, just coming up, is a huge oak tree, which stands in the middle of a roundabout and was no doubt, well, looks pretty clear to me that the roundabout was built to accommodate this tree, which I think is a great thing. And what you'll see maybe on the left of your screen there, next to the post box, is a green sign. I'll try and zoom in on that. So that sign says, "Welcome to Bromley." And this marks the boundary of the boroughs of, I think it's Lewisham and Bromley. And no doubt this tree was a marker tree that marked a boundary before it was a London borough boundary. This was in the parish of Penge, or the local authority of Penge, which was, and of course Penge, interestingly, is a very old English word for a clearing near the woods and refers to the Great North Wood. So this tree was probably a significant tree at that time. It's very close to Crystal Palace. The border runs straight past here. The parish of Penge was connected to the parish of Battersea back in the day. And through a lot of government reorganisation during the 19th century, Penge became its own local authority and was merged into Bromley in 1965. So now it forms the boundary with Bromley, which is interesting that the boundaries still remain the same and the tree still marks the boundary in a way. Again, this is a fabulous old English or pedunculate oak. Have another look at it, and you can see that it's double stemmed, and they've put some benches around the base of it. There are a lot of other big old oaks around here as well, which could be remnants from hedges or from the Great North Wood as well. But this is clearly the most significant tree. I'm not sure I can tell you much more about that one, but maybe we should move on to the next one. The next one is, I mentioned the horse chestnut being with us since the 17th century. So the next one is another chestnut, this time a sweet chestnut, which of course is totally unrelated to horse chestnut. Horse chestnut is an Aesculus, Aesculus hippocastanum, and a sweet chestnut is Castanea sativa. Sweet chestnut is where the edible chestnuts come from. It is a tree which is thought to have been introduced by the Romans or possibly the Normans, but either way, it's been with us for centuries. It is a tree which has been planted a lot for its timber and as a food source. So I'm going to move us away from the oak and onto a sweet chestnut. So coming up on your screen now is the Putney sweet chestnut, and this is on Heathview Gardens, which is in the middle of Putney Common. It's some very swanky gated houses, and this old, probably pollarded sweet chestnut has been left to take up the entire pavement. Let me see whether we can get a better view of it a different time of year. So this is it in March 2018, which is just going to come up, and you can get a sense of how old and wonderful this tree is. It's really quite big. I don't think Streetview particularly does justice to it. You can see that it's completely blocked the pavement. I imagine the residents of this street probably don't walk there too much, so it doesn't cause too much of a problem. And I do hope that it continues to grow there. It looks like the pavement could do with a bit of removal to stop it bursting over the curb and everything. But this is a fantastic tree, one that I have to admit I've never actually visited in real life, and one that I had planned to visit this spring, but sadly I haven't been able to as yet, and probably won't be able to do that this year. I'm going to take us back to June 2019. So just coming up on the screen is another view. Unfortunately, there's vans in the way, but you can see the tree is just coming into flower here. These spikes in the canopy will get yellower and creamier through June, and they will then turn into the horse chestnuts, which have the very spiny nuts, which are much more fearsome, I think, than a horse chestnut, which has a few spikes on it, but these are really spiky. And no doubt this would have been a tree which could have been either a boundary tree, could have been a pollard within woodland, and not this one, but often sweet chestnuts are pollarded, are coppiced, meaning that they're cut off at the base to provide poles for wood. And the wood would be probably used for fencing for sweet chestnut, possibly firewood as well, but fencing is the traditional use of it. In Kent, the poles were used to make hop poles. Nothing else would do. So maybe if they grew hops in Putney at one time, they could have been hop poles as well. So I'm going to move on to the next one. So we've been in Putney, and the next one is in Ealing. So let me get back to, let me get this one. So this is on Carlton Road in Ealing, and it's a tree that's known as the elephant tree, intriguingly. It's another, probably a boundary tree. It's been left in situ as the Ealing has grown up around it. I'm just going to get a good view of it for us, and then I'm going to swap the screen. So this is the elephant tree on Carlton Road, another English oak. It's been left in the middle of the road. It's called the elephant tree because apparently an elephant is buried underneath it. Now, I don't know whether we can believe that or not, but it's a great story, and I'll tell you the story. So in the early 20th century, a circus was passing through here, which was going to take part in some fair or exhibition in London. This was sort of, you know, just over 100 years ago. This tree is obviously, well, much older than that. So the elephant was part of this parade, and sadly it died. And it died when it was walking through Ealing, and they didn't know quite what to do with the body, so they buried it, and then this tree grew up above the elephant, is the story. But I think that's probably untrue. Maybe an elephant did die as it was going through Ealing, and maybe it was buried nearby, and maybe that has given rise to its local name of the elephant tree. But it certainly wasn't planted to commemorate the elephant. I think it's remarkable that it's left here in the street. I imagine it's had a few collisions. You can see as you get a bit closer, you can see around that branch there, some vans have crashed into it. Another thing which I think is quite interesting about this tree is you can see this white around the base. And I was wondering what that was when I was looking at that. And I'm not entirely sure, but my guess is that it might be the remains of whitewash. If anybody's been to places particularly in Southern Europe and apparently in China as well, street trees tend to have whitewashed bases. And I believe that is partly to do with discouraging insects and pests to get higher up the tree, but also is a way of trying to highlight the tree at night. So I wonder whether this tree would have been whitewashed at one time in its life. So the next one we're going to, you may have noticed as well on this tour that we're getting further and further into town on this spiral. So I'm going to take us back to the spiral view. And the next one we're going to is the Finsbury Park Almond. So the Finsbury Park Almond is one of my favourite trees. I live not far from it, and I go and look at it every year. This year it flowered in January. That was particularly early. I have seen it flower in January before. It has really tremendous pink blossom, which I shall hopefully be able to show you some views of that blossom. Let me move on to the screen with the Finsbury Park Almond. So you may be thinking, oh, it doesn't look much, but let me take you a bit closer to it. So we're going to go down this little street here. And I'm going to turn you round. Now, hopefully coming up on your screen now is the almond tree in its winter glory. So this view is in March 2019. The flowers are over in March 2019, even though it flowered quite late then. This is March 2018. This is after the beast from the east, when we had a really ferocious winter. It flowered very late, and you can see that it's that Streetview has captured it in flower in March 2018. I've probably got an image of the flowers as well, because they really are quite spectacular. Almonds, of course, are a prunus, so they're related to the cherries. This is Prunus dulcis. They have white or pink blossom. The Finsbury Park almond has pink blossom. Just coming up on your screen now are some pictures of that very tree in blossom, or some close-ups of the blossom. The flowers are quite large, so not only does it flower very early, it flowers quite dramatically as well. And so it really is a local landmark because of that. But the other really remarkable thing about the Finsbury Park almond is its trunk. I'm not sure whether you noticed that when we were looking at the trunk on the street view. I'll take you back to have a look at that. But it has this really dramatic, rounded corkscrew trunk, which it's really, to me, it's a mystery how it got like that. But hopefully you can see this. It's almost double back on itself. So it's kind of gone one way and then folded back the other way. And I really don't know how that's occurred. And I'm sort of amazed that the council has allowed it to continue to grow. And I admire the council, which is, it's in Haringey, this tree. So it's a great tree and a local landmark just across the road from Nando's. So you can get your chicken and chips and in January, sit in the window and just admire it. Right, so what have we got next? The next one is a very unusual tree. So let me just get this one ready. So we're going down to South London now, back to South London, and we're going to go to Rotherhithe. So Rotherhithe is quite close to the river and has quite a mild climate because the river keeps the winter cold away. It doesn't tend to get terribly frosty down there. And there's a really remarkable tree, which I'm going to show you, which is the only one I know of in London. And going to remove that, get you onto the Rotherhithe police station. So here is the Rotherhithe Silky Oak. So this is an Australian tree, Grevillea robusta. It's a tree which occasionally is put into flower beds as an annual because it has really dramatic foliage, and I suspect this is might have been what's happened here. Usually they die off, but it is a tree, and it's been able to grow here, and it's been here for decades, and it's growing outside what's now the former police station at Rotherhithe. Going to take you back and have a look at it in 2008. So here it is in 2008, a bit smaller, so it's grown quite a bit in 11 years. And you can see that the police station was still a police station then, so the cuts have reduced that police station. I think it shut about 3 or 4 years ago. I'm going to show you a close-up of the leaves as well. It's called a silky oak. It's nothing to do with an oak tree. It's, as I say, it comes from Australia. Grevillea is the genus, Grevillea robusta. I think I might have mentioned that already. It's called an oak or it's known as an oak. It's a colonial name, really. Colonists arrived in Australia and exploited, obviously, all the trees and so on that were there. And this tree had really fine timber, which was really useful in all sorts of construction work. And they likened it to English oak or the familiar oak, but there's nothing else that's remotely like an oak tree. It has these really beautiful frondy leaves. So this is just one leaf that I'm showing you on screen now. It flowers. I've never seen it flower, but I've heard that it does. Not quite sure what those are like. It is deciduous, but it kind of is a bit odd in its deciduousness. So I'm going to take you back to the street view again and have a look at it through the seasons. So here it is in June 2008. Here it is in April 2015, and you can see that it's in leaf rather. I think the word silky comes from the effect of the leaves in the wind. It has a very attractive silky kind of rustle to it. This is June 2019, and I think we've got February 2018 here. So it's in leaf there. But there was one where it was in, I think, might not be able to find this now, typically. Here it is, May 2018. So coming up now is May 2018. And May 2018, it had no leaves on it. I thought it had died, but it has subsequently come into leaf. So I don't know whether this is just the tree adjusting to the British climate or whatever it is, but it can be in leaf at various different times of year and drops its leaves at odd times of the year. And I think those might be seed pods associated with it. So it's a tree I don't know that much about. Maybe if there's anybody on this call that knows a bit more about these trees, we can have a chat about that afterwards. Right, I should move on to the next one. So we're getting towards the end of the tour now. We've got to have a plane tree, right? So the next one is going to be the Windrush Square plane tree. So Windrush Square is in Brixton, and there's a really fantastic plane tree there, which is right outside the Ritzy Cinema. If anybody knows Brixton, is a local landmark. I'm going to bring that up on your screen now. So the Brixton Windrush Square plane used to be known, and it is an official great tree, this one. It used to be known as the Tate plane, which seems a really odd name for it. But the library, which is behind me, Brixton Library, is the Tate Library, and that's where it gets its name from. But I think it should be known as the Windrush Square plane, because the square outside the library was renamed Windrush Square. The Black History Archives are on Windrush Square, And I think that this should be a much more appropriate name rather than the Tate Plane, and nobody really calls the library the Tate Library. So there it is, the Windrush Square plane, a really fantastic example of a London plane that has been left to grow. It hasn't been pollarded like many plane trees that you see around town, and it gives a sense of just how dramatic these trees can become. I think I've got another image of that as well, which I'm going to bring up for you. So the thing about this tree is that it must be early 19th or mid 19th century. Just coming up on your screen now is an image which I photographed, I think last summer or the summer before. I think this is the Pyramidalis cultivar of London planes. If any of you have been on any of my walks, you know how I like to bang on about London planes, so I won't bang on too much about London planes, but notice this one and how it has this very spreading canopy, and we've got one more plane coming up. The last plane, or the last tree on our tour, is a plane, and it's quite different to this one. So this is a very typical 19th century plane. A lot of the planes in London parks tend to be this cultivar, which has this spreading canopy, has quite a warty trunk compared with some planes where you see the mottled flaky trunk, which is typical of them. So I'm going to go back to the, where am I taking you? Taking you back to the map is where I'm taking you. And we are going to go to the next one, which is in Pimlico, and it's a mimosa. So this is a really great tree, a young tree which has been another Australian tree which flowers very early in the spring, in January or February. It has really traumatic blossom, which is yellow and fragrant, and is a tree which we're going to have a close look at. If I can just get the Street View lined up. And fortunately, on Street View, it's in flower. That's the great thing about Street View, is you can see it during the seasons. So coming up now on your screen is the Pimlico mimosa. It's past its best. This is shot in 2019, so I'm not quite sure what time of year. It must have been about March, I would think. But there it is, in flower in March 2019. It's quite a big tree now. I'm going to show you a picture of a close-up of the couple of images of it as well. As I say, this is an Australian tree. It's an Acacia. Acacia dealbata is the Latin name. It's in Australia, it takes on the same sort of role that birch does here as a pioneer tree. So it will grow very opportunistically wherever it can get a foothold, and will be grow fast and rapidly and die quite young. So compared to an oak tree, for instance, so these trees, their natural lifespan isn't terribly long. They have these really fantastic blossoms, which are fragrant. They're often used in perfumery. It's an evergreen tree. It's an acacia, and it has these doubly pinnate leaves with hundreds of little tiny leaves on the actual leaflets. So doubly pinnate, I should explain that term. So in leaf morphology, as it's called, leaves have different shapes. You get a pinnate leaf, which means you have multiple leaflets on a single stem. So an ash tree is a good example of a pinnate leaf. This is doubly pinnate, so it has multiple stems on a leaf stem. So it splits twice, and then you have the leaflets. So a single leaf is one of those branched leaves with dozens, if not hundreds, of leaflets on it. Very attractive tree. I have a picture of this very tree coming up as well, which I think I shot in February a few years ago. I'm going to take you back to Street View, and we're going to have a look at this tree through the years, and I can show you just how rapidly these trees grow, which is going to be quite surprising, I should think. So this is 2019. and we're going to go back to 2008. So just coming up on your screen now is this tree in 2008. It's a very small tree, and you can just see that within 11 years, it's become a pretty mature tree. So going to go back to 2019. There it is in 2019 in flower. So a word of caution if anybody's thinking of planting one in their garden, perhaps. They get quite big quite quickly. Beautiful trees. They're quite frost intolerant. So again, being in Pimlico here is probably a good place for it. Surrounded by buildings, the urban heat island will keep the microclimate around it quite mild. So it probably doesn't suffer from frost. It probably never gets frosty here. It will flower very well with that reflected heat, especially with those buildings being white as well. Right, so I'm just going to pass over to Andrew briefly, who has wanted to say something. So Andrew.
Just aware, if anyone needs to leave early, we have recorded this talk, so we are able to let you see the last 10 minutes. But I think, Paul, you're going to be about another 10 minutes or 5 minutes?
Well, maybe I've got 2 more trees to go. So why don't I miss out one of them and go straight to the last one? How about that? Because the other one, it's an elm tree, the Marylebone elm. I'll tell you about it as we go to the other one. How about that? So the Marylebone elm is on Marylebone High Street. It's a fantastic tree. It's really difficult to get a good view of it. But I think the one that I'm going to show you now is the last one, and it's on Cheapside in the city. So this is a plane tree. It's called the Cheapside plane. If anybody knows Cheapside, they will probably have seen this tree. It's a local landmark. It could be up to 300 years old. I'm going to move over to this tree now. Let me get onto this one. So the last tree before we move on to some questions. This is the Cheapside plane. It's on the corner of Wood Street. So I'm just going to go down the street a bit, and you will see here this magnificent tree not far from St Paul's Cathedral. What I think is remarkable about this tree as well is you can see the buildings in front of it. Those buildings are early 19th century. All the buildings around it have been modern high-rise buildings. This tree has caused those buildings not to be developed. And so that tree stops development in the city. And for that reason alone, I think it's worthy of great tree status. I've got an image of it to show you as well. So this is, where's it gone? Okay, so just going to get this one up. I don't know whether anybody's come across a book called London Trees. It's from 1920, and it's by A.D. Webster. And he wrote this fantastic book about trees in the early 20th century. And he includes a photograph of what he calls the Wood Street plane tree. And here it is I think it's probably taken in 1919. And it hasn't changed that much, hasn't got that much bigger. So when someone told me it could be 300 years old, I was a bit surprised at that, because there aren't that many trees that are that old, not too many plane trees that are that old in London. But now I'm beginning to think this probably could be 300 years old. So this is 100 years ago, and you could easily see it being 200 years before this. You'll also notice that this tree has quite a different shape to that one in Brixton. So it's a different cultivar and is much more like some of the older plane trees that we see around town. So I think I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to get, if anybody has a question, raise their hand, and I will try and look out for you. So was that a hand there from Emma? No? Yes, okay. So Mike, I'm just going to unmute you, and if you want to ask away.
Yeah, sorry to be a nuisance. It was absolutely wonderful, but I am very interested in Marylebone, and I just wondered if there's any chance for a picture of the Marylebone.
Oh, okay. There, yeah, I knew. That's fair enough, fair enough. I'm going to take you back to Marylebone. I'm unmuting you and taking you back to Marylebone. I'm going to mute you and take you back there. There you go. So let me get Marylebone High Street on the. So you can't keep a good tree down, can you? And the Marylebone elm, which is a Huntingdon elm, which will be coming up on your screen very shortly, is a really, really terrific tree, and is one that I would certainly visit at any time of the year to go and have a look at just how fantastic this is. Now, where is it? So here it comes, the Marylebone elm on Marylebone High Street, a fantastic survivor of Dutch elm disease. It's almost vegeta. I can't quite remember the Latin name of it, but it's a Huntingdon elm, unlike the European white elm that we saw earlier. It is, I'm just going to look it up in my book, actually, while we're talking about that one. So I think the great thing about this tree is that the Huntingdon elm, it's an almost cross Hollandica vegeta. There you go. So this tree has been here for well over a century. It's a really, really fantastic tree. I'm going to go back to 2008 and you can see how little it has changed in 11 years. So this is 2008. So if you're down on Marylebone High Street, perhaps doing a bit of shopping in the Conran shop, or visiting the one of the rather lovely restaurants down there, in the future, if once we're allowed out again, there it is, the Marylebone elm. A fantastic tree to end on, perhaps more apt than the Cheapside plane. So thank you, Mike, for getting me to do that. I'm going to stop the share again now and get you back on. So if anybody else has a question, I'm just going to unmute Andrew, who is wants to say something.
No, I'm not really saying anything at all. I'm waiting for it's my turn at the end.
Okay, right. Okay.
You've just had a question from someone who's asked about the streets in your background picture. So,
yeah, okay. Good question. Thank you. Yes, I meant to say about these. So this is not on my little map, but they do appear on the Great Trees of London map, and in my new book, the London Street Trees Revised Edition. In fact, they feature on the front cover, and these are the Yoshino cherries on Winterbrook Road in Dulwich, Herne Hill. These are Japanese cherries, Prunus crossyedoensis, and they're a really fantastic type of cherry tree in Winterbrook Road. It's been entirely planted with this species, and they really look fantastic. Go in early March or mid-March, I think, to see them at their prime. I took this in March last year. They were very early this year because we obviously had quite a early spring. Okay, so is there anybody else that has a question? So Harja, let me unmute you.
Yes, my question actually was related to protection policies around those trees that you've shown us.
Yeah.
Are they protected under the local government, or is there something more national that keeps them there?
Well, it's going to be a very mixed picture. So most of these trees well, several of them are public trees on public land that are street trees. So for instance, the mimosa I showed you is in Westminster, and that's managed and looked after by Westminster City Council. And other trees like that will be, and they won't have any statutory protection on them because the protection is handed out by local councils. So anybody that has a tree in their garden that's of some remark will have come across tree preservation orders. But most trees on this tour are unlikely to have any formal protection other than they're being looked after by the local authorities. And although local authorities get a bad press for looking after trees, my experience is that particularly the tree officers who work for the local authorities really champion these trees and will do everything in their power to ensure that they survive. And I also think it's through us knowing about them that we become more aware of them, and they will survive better. So yeah, that's all I can tell you about them, I'm afraid. Nothing formal.
Surprising.
Yeah. It would be good if we could get some more formal protection, perhaps, like a bit like listing buildings. I feel they could be doing something like that. Okay, I'm going to mute you and then move on to anybody else has a question. If you wave frantically, or so Andrew has a question.
Well, no, it's just that someone in the chat, Chloe Knight, has asked what makes a tree bubble up around the bottom like the sweet chestnut in Putney?
Well,
so,
yeah, okay. Well, that's a good question. And I think that's probably just down to the tree getting too big for the pavement. So the pavement was laid down, and it's like any, it's just physics. It's growing and it's bubbled up over the pavement. It's been constrained. And what hasn't been done very well there is that the pavement hasn't been managed to be removed to allow that tree to just grow naturally. But that could have happened historically, and it might be that it's being looked after a lot better. Typically, you will see that sort of management going on in the past, and trees, because it's, it takes a long time for them to get through that process of growing, they are not going to, you will see that history in them for decades after it's happened. So I hope that answers your question, Chloe. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, there's another one from Hadia, which is, what grants a tree the title of a great tree?
Well, that's a really good question, and one that I think will be
discussed.
Sorry?
Will be discussed at length at the Urban Tree Festival.
That's true. So there's quite a lot of ways that a tree can be great. It's a very subjective. Let me first of all put that out there. It's quite subjective. There was this book that was published in 2006. I don't know whether anyone's seen that, The Great Trees of London, which is a list of 61 trees that are all over London, and those were voted for by the public. 40 of those were voted on after the Great Storm of 1987, and we lost a lot of trees. 20 were added in the early 2000s, and they were selected by the public, and I think a jury must have decided which ones were worthy of it. But when you look at that list, there's an awful lot of plane trees and an awful lot of oak trees. And so in this year, I was asked by a publisher called Blue Crow Media to produce this map, which was published a few weeks ago. That has 46 trees on it, some of which are in that Time Out book, some of which are the ones I've shown you today, and some of which are completely only in that map. But we went through from a long list of about 150 trees and whittled it down to 46. And we looked at things like diversity, different stories to do with age, to do with history, and to do with social history. So for instance, the cherry trees behind me are on the list on the map because they're fantastic examples of these cherry trees in London. There isn't a finer cherry tree avenue in my mind, and I've done quite a bit of research. Other people might disagree with me, but I believe that cherry tree avenues is something which is a very British London thing. It's part of the urban fabric. So I think they're worthy of celebration. Other trees that are on there are things like the Marylebone Elm, amazing survivor, great landmark. The Grevillea, the Silky Oak in Rotherhithe, is on my list because it's a remarkable tree which shows how climate is changing and speaks to us about our current conditions. So there's lots of different reasons, I think. And as Andrew said, it's something that we will be debating during the Urban Tree Festival. Look at urbantreefestival.org and hopefully we can join in some of the discussions around that. And we're going to be looking at the different reasons why great trees are great trees. So I hope that answers the question. And if anybody else has got a question, raise your hand or put it in the chat and Andrew will ask it. No? Is that everybody's questions done, perhaps. Well, I think to conclude, I'd like to say thank you all for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. I mentioned earlier at the in the chat that there is my map is for sale, the one that I was just mentioned earlier, and you can buy that online. I'm going to put the link into the chat. Oh, sorry, I think I sent that just to Hardy. I meant to send it to everybody. So in the chat is a link, and I'm going to give you a code which will give you free postage. And the free postage is on all the items that I've got for sale, all the books as well. So that's going to be up for the next, I think, 2 days. So if you wanted to buy a book, signed copies, I will dispatch them early next week and use that code to get free postage. I'm afraid it's UK only if anybody's not from the UK, but I'm sorry about that. Just postage for books becomes very difficult. Although maybe if you were particularly interested, email me and we'll see if we can sort something out. The Urban Tree Festival, Andrew mentioned, is coming up 16th to 24th of May, sorry. And I think that probably concludes this meeting. So if anybody else has a final question, and if Andrew, you'd like to say anything to conclude, please wave. Oh, yes, David, let me unmute you.
I was just going to say thank you very much indeed, Paul. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. And that was really great. I hope it was of interest and that it wasn't too dry, perhaps. And yes, we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Well, what I think we need to say, Paul, is that we have recorded this on video.
Yeah.
So we can, we hope, let you have another look at it if you want to. We're going to send out a feedback form. I know they're really tiresome, but this is a short one, and it's really, really important for us because we're all learning in this game. It's very new to us. We want to know whether you had problems with technology, with the way that Paul slipped the slides across, how you got your chance to speak, blah, blah, blah. We need to know that kind of stuff, especially because you are the successful ones. And we've got 15 people who didn't make the call because of some technical issue. And you did. So we almost need to know how you manage that. In the meantime, we have a public art tour on Wednesday, so sign up to that if you can, which is on Wednesday evening. Otherwise, I think Paul has got a Streetview book launch coming up. Paul?
Yeah, next Thursday evening there is a launch of my new Street Trees book, the new edition of the Street Trees book, which you can go to safehavenbooks.co.uk, who are the publisher, and you can sign up there. Also, if you visit my website, if you go to the events page, there's a link through to that. So yes, thank you. And one final thank you from me is thank you all very much for donating. If anybody would like to make a donation, please visit the Museum of Walking site. Obviously, it really helps us finance these things, and it's really important at this time of at this difficult time to ensure we get a little bit of money rolling in. So thank you to all who have donated, and hopefully we'll see you online again soon.
A big round of applause for Paul, I think.
Right, I'm going to unmute you all. So there. So thank you all very much.
Right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. I'm going to end it now. So goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.